Okay, good evening again for one of my not so famous, perhaps more infamous talks on various subjects. This is in preparation for a conversation that we're going to have with a discussion group later in August, dealing with God. And there are a lot of different questions regarding God, and it doesn't matter whether you believe in God or not. It is still an important thing to discuss. And the first part of our discussion deals with God in the Bible and God of the Bible. These are two separate ways of looking at what is written uh, in the Bible, both the Hebrew Bible and the New Testament, for that matter. Um, and we're going to start with dealing with whether what is in the Bible is the true Word of God or whether it is metaphor that can be interpreted. The difference is God in the Bible is the direct interpretation. God of the Bible is the God that we try to reach through biblical stories and the use of metaphor. All right, so let's we're just picking some sections out almost at random that just happened to strike my memory. The creation story. Right, if you take it literally, you have a whole mess of problems to deal with. Uh, which just don't jive with science or much with common sense either. Uh, Light was created first. That part's okay. There's actually some physical evidence that there may have been light early in the creation of the universe. And then the sky afterwards. Now, I'm not sure what the light was like before there was a sky. And then there follows the next day the land, the sea, and plants, and the sun and the moon and stars follow. It's very unlikely that the sun would have been created after plants, which require the sun to function. So you have a problem if you're going to interpret the Bible literally, that order is correct and that God presented that order to somebody to write down, and you're better off using metaphor. But even the metaphor category can be divided into two classes. One is a metaphor meant for the people of the time, and the second is a universal metaphor, good for all time. A good example of this would be the sacrifice that was asked of Abraham to sacrifice his own son, commanded by God. And at the last moment, he ends up substituting a ram that he finds in the woods for Isaac, and Isaac is freed. There's remarkably little discussion in the story about why God would ask for sacrifice and whether God provided the ram or not. In any case, looking at it as metaphor on either the lower or the higher level, it's easy to say that this is an indication that the time of human sacrifice is over and will be replaced with animal sacrifice. And in similar fashion, at some point in the future, animal sacrifice will be replaced by prayer. And if you're dealing with the God of the Bible, you're free to go that far. If you're dealing with God in the Bible, I guess you could still make up the fact that God placed the ram there, um, knowing that Abraham would make the switch. But I think perhaps you're getting the feel for what we are talking about now when we say God in the Bible, the literal story, uh, versus God of the Bible, which is man reaching out to try to explain everything. And to explain everything, basically, you're trying to explain God, creation, the rules for life, the nature of life, etc., etc. Next point we'll discuss along those lines, the story of the flood, everybody's familiar with. Interpreting it literally gives you lots of trouble. One, there's no evidence that the world was completely flooded at any time. There is certainly historical evidence of massive flooding in prehistoric times, which covered a good part of Africa, which may have been the entire world known to mankind at that time. So there may be some history, some truth in the story. Let's see, I hope this audio is on. Otherwise, I'm going to have to redo this whole thing. Okay, I think it's on. When I touch the thing, so it looks like there's the ability to turn it off. All right, I'll find out at the end. In any case, back to the flood and the rain. So in addition to the fact that there's no evidence of flood of that magnitude, there's no way one could build an ark large enough to hold two of every kind of animal. At that time, they had no idea how many animals there were, counting all the bugs and insects and everything else that would be drowned by a flood. It is just technically and mathematically impossible to have two of everything. It would also be a great risk if the two were not able to produce progeny. And it would take quite some time for a population of animals to get large enough to provide food for human beings. So the story is clearly a fanciful tale, but you can take it as a metaphor that misbehavior gets punished. To excellent metaphor, you could use it for global warming, for example. People are not taking care of the earth properly. They're sinning, and they're being punished by storms and floods and heat waves, etc., etc. That is certainly pushing the analysis to the modern metaphor stage. But again, the whole business of biblical interpretation goes much easier if you take it as metaphor. If you're a fundamentalist, you just have to struggle with all those inconsistencies and come up with whatever excuse you can. Story of Sodom and Gomorrah. One, it would appear a little strange that God wouldn't know whether there were any good people in the city or not. An all-knowing God should know that. But nonetheless, after exploration of the city, they're all found to be sinners except for two people who escape. And if I remember the story correctly, I believe it was Lot's wife who looked back against God's commandment and was turned into a pillar of salt. Uh, that's a very strict penalty for a minor infraction, it would seem to me. I think you would have a great deal of difficulty interpreting that literally. However, people can be punished terribly for minimal mistakes, such as mistaking poison for baking soda, for example, or touching a live electrical wire, or playing outside in a thunderstorm and being struck by lightning. So the metaphor of unbelievably severe punishment for relatively minor infractions uh, has a lot of reality to it. And therefore, you clearly get my preference is to take the Bible as metaphor. And so we're talking about God of the Bible, the creative process that led to everything, which subsequently led to the writing of the Bible by people who did not have the historical knowledge of the past, nor could they accurately divine the long-term future of humankind. The tendency to attribute everything to God was pretty normal at the time. Every time Israel lost a war, there was only one explanation for it: God is punishing them for their sins. We know today that the losing side of wars are not necessarily the sinful side. It is oftentimes the other way around. However, you can use the metaphor that sinful behavior can lead to wars, and addressing those ahead of time might be a good idea. The other point that I'll raise in terms of literal interpretation deals with the flight from Egypt. It's the keystone, the cornerstone of Jewish theology, the Bible, the Exodus from Egypt. And in spite of Indiana Jones and a lot of other people trying very hard to find evidence of that, there is preciously little evidence. In fact, that's an understatement. There's really no evidence of an exodus of the kind in the Bible. This is a problem for fundamentalists. It is not a problem for people who see the story as a metaphor. It is an incredibly powerful metaphor of going from slavery to freedom and being grateful for it, and being instructed between doing right and doing wrong. Makes for a good movie. Everybody's seen the 10 Commandments or the 15 Commandments, depending which version you saw first. In any case, interpreting the stories as metaphor makes life easier. So I deal personally with God of the Bible as opposed to the God reflected in the Bible. And God of the Bible refers to all the forces, facts, and morality that people strived for in writing the Bible. And this carries over, as far as I'm concerned, to the New Testament as well. I've read the Hebrew Bible twice in its entirety. The New Testament, the Christian Bible, I will admit I've only read once through. And one of the things that struck me there was the resurrection of Jesus was validated by the fact that Jesus was gone, the door was open, and there were no guards there. Now, if you interpret the Bible literally, there's only one explanation. He went directly from being dead to being resurrected. The more common way that you would respond to that was that he wasn't really dead, and the guards opened the door for him and then fled themselves. What the truth is, if you are like I am, one who thinks in terms of God of the Bible as opposed to God in the Bible, finds it not necessary to do that. The story of the crucifixion and the resurrection of Christ is a powerful story. And it does not matter whether it happened exactly as described in the Gospels, which vary on some very important facts between the various editions. It is a tale of hope and resurrection and forgiveness. So again, the God of the Bible can handle the Old Testament, the New Testament, and any other testament as well. And it enables you to discard parts that you may find completely objectionable, saying that this was, the concept of the people at the time. It just makes life easier. So I'll just present two other short comments. There will be after this discussion of God in the Bible versus God of the Bible, and metaphor versus more abstract metaphor. We will go on to discuss Maimonides, who is a very prominent Jewish figure. Some rank him as second only to Moses of the Bible and in the Bible. Maimonides was an amazing philosopher. We'll get into details later, but his major contribution was to state that the Bible is metaphor, with the exception of the instructions given to Moses. And he says it's because Moses talked directly to God, and all the other prophets and sages were merely inspired by God and didn't have that personal connection. This made a major change in the ability to interpret Jewish texts. And he was undoubtedly a very profound thinker, and worth a session talking about him next. One subtlety that you find when you read about Maimonides is that he left some cryptic notes saying that some of the things he said are so complicated and so intricate that only his best students will understand them, because he doesn't always say exactly what he means. And I just wonder whether he didn't consider Moses as metaphor too, but he was smart enough to know that if he took that one step too far, everything else would have been thrown out at the time. He would have been excommunicated, considered a villain. In fact, there was a group that considered him a villain anyhow, but over the ages, his prominence increased because he was so knowledgeable and erudite, regarding the text of the Torah, their writings afterwards, the whole Hebrew Bible, that he's still a revered figure. But he at least opened the door. He opened the door to metaphoric interpretation of most of the Bible. And our last session will deal with Spinoza, who was excommunicated as a Jew. He had a much more mystical concept of God. He actually believed in God, even though he was accused of being an atheist. It's probably the kind of God that many atheists couldn't adjust to or deal with. But he, in my view, made the mistake, though, of saying the whole Bible is basically a bunch of baloney. They said what they said and they meant what they said, and there's no metaphor in there at all, which I don't think is correct. I think there are some very bright people who wrote much of the Bible, and there are powerful lessons there that I would not throw out the way Spinoza does. But in any case, he's still considered a brilliant philosopher, and we'll end the three-part series with a discussion of Spinoza's God. And with that, we've used up 22 minutes, which is enough of your time, and I wish everybody a good night. And for the discussion group, I can't remember the exact date, but we'll see you in late August, and hopefully I'll get those other two presentations here. Good night, all.